So welcome everyone. We're happy to have Jared Smith with us here from WebAIM. WebAIM stands for Web Accessibility in Mind, as I'm sure you're aware of, and that's out of the university, Utah State University. Jared's worked in the field of web accessibility for 13 years, and he's just done extensive training internationally for web developers. He's written many tutorials and developed lots of accessibility resources that many of us probably use on a regular basis. If you're subscribed to the WebAIM list, you'll see regular advice from Jared posted there. So welcome, Jared. It's just wonderful to have you here. I love the title of your presentation. So I believe your manner of dealing with questions is that if people have questions during your presentation, those can be typed in the chat, and I'll follow the chat. And then if you want to have audio questions, we'll save time at the end when you can use the microphone and just talk with Jared about your questions. So Jared, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
You bet, and thank you for that introduction and for the opportunity to speak to you today. I think you've probably heard enough about me. I just would encourage you to visit webaim.org if you're not familiar with our site, and I'll show you a few of the resources available on the WebAIM site at the end. So I'm just going to dive right into this, start talking about web accessibility. This is not a technical presentation. This is not a real how-to presentation. It's a little bit more about the concept of web accessibility and usability and the overlap and some of the approaches that we can use to have a better implementation and better success in web accessibility. So even though this is not a technical presentation, I want to start by talking a little bit about functional accessibility versus functional accessibility. Now, web accessibility is really, by definition, largely a technical thing. We're talking about the web here, right? We're talking about technology, assistive technology, and implementing things to be compatible. Implementing things so our web content is compatible with assistive technology. So it is largely a technical thing. With that said, I think it's important that we make this differentiation between technical accessibility and functional accessibility. Consider a really complex menu system with fly-out or drop-down type menus. We've seen sites that have many hundreds of navigational items in the menu, all packed into these cascading type menus. Now you could make this type of menu system keyboard accessible, so somebody using the keyboard can hit the tab key to navigate through lanes. Shift tab will allow them to navigate backwards through lanes or other interactive things like form controls. So you could make this complex menu keyboard accessible to somebody so they could hit the tab key and navigate in order all the way through all of those menu systems in this complex fly-out menu. But this is going to really result in potentially several hundred individual instances that the user must hit the tab key to navigate through that menu system. And not just to navigate the menu system, but to get through that menu system on every single page in order to get to the good stuff, right? The main content of that page, which is really what the user is going to be looking for. So consider that type of interaction, hitting the tab key that many times, and you might think about your own website. How many times would somebody need to hit the tab key on your website from the beginning of the page through the main navigation, maybe through search, maybe there's a sidebar or something like that until they get to the main content. Now consider that type of interaction for somebody maybe that's using a mouth wand or a head stick or some other sort of assistive technology, where maybe because they cannot use a mouse, may not have fine motor control, things like that, no use of their arms, things like that, they might be using some sort of device like this to interact with the keyboard. Is somebody like that really going to hit the tab key, say 200 times, to go through the menu system and get to the main content on a web page? Probably not. They're going to give up. Now, technically, that site is accessible. Technically, you can navigate it using the keyboard. Functionally, is it accessible? I would argue probably not. At least it's not very friendly or efficient for a user from a functional standpoint to go through that type of interaction. So you really can't design or program a user's experience. You can only enable that experience. We, in web design and web development, we spend so much time on design and programming, and that's important, but sometimes we do that because we're going to build this user experience. We're going to lock them into this great experience that we want them to have, and that mentality is great. We want our users to have good, positive experiences, but we need to understand that their experience may be different than our own. We need to give up this idea of pixel precision and absolute control over the ways in which users may interact with the things that we're building, the way that they access the things that we have provided to them. Instead, we want to enable an experience. We don't force our experience on users with disabilities, no more so than we drag wheelchairs up the stairs to give wheelchair users the same experience of getting to the second floor that we have. Instead, we enable an experience. I'm not exactly sure what this picture is saying. I'm hoping it's saying that the accessible restroom is upstairs, or maybe it's suggesting that it takes a man and a woman to drag the wheelchair up the stairs. I'm not quite sure, but right, we provide a ramp, we provide an elevator, some mechanism. We enable the user experience to get to the second floor in the way that's most suitable to them and to the technology that they may be using. So a lot of what we're trying to do with accessibility is to provide content and functionality in a way that the user can show up with their technology, plug into it, and it's going to give them what they need. It's going to work. And that's really the idea behind accessibility guidelines, is that if we follow accessibility guidelines, we're going to have a fairly standardized website from which users can get the accessibility and the content and functionality that they need in a standardized way. But the reality is that while this is what we're trying to build and what we're trying to present to the users, the reality is that this is sometimes more of what we're dealing with, especially in the background, in the code and on our servers and in our file management and our course management systems. We're dealing with antiquated systems and complexity, especially with modern web applications and libraries, and dealing with cross-browser compatibility and assistive technology and code standards and accessibility guidelines. And it really starts to become quite overwhelming, and often our code and our accessibility solutions start to turn into this convoluted, kind of a complex mess. So, but this is really what we're after, right? And you might ask that question, does it really matter? Does it really matter what all that code and all that other stuff looks like if this is what the user is presented, if we're presenting a standardized way of the user to get their accessibility? And it's becoming increasingly difficult for us to tell the accessibility of something simply by looking at it. It used to be that you could kind of look at a page and you say, oh wow, yeah, there's probably some accessibility issues there. And you can do that in certain ways with things like color contrast and small text and some other things that are quite apparent visually that they're going to introduce accessibility issues. But a lot of this compatibility with assistive technologies is a little more difficult to detect simply by looking at it. You need to interact with it. And part of the difficulty of viewing accessibility is building this fully standardized interface that the user is just going to show up and plug in their assistive technology and that's going to work, is that there really is no standard end user, and there's really no standard end user assistive technology. What happens when the user is unique and comes to the table with something like this, a plug that has round plugs on it rather than our horizontal type ones. And suddenly, because of that user's ability or disability, their tastes or interests or skills or the technology that they happen to be using, suddenly they're no longer able to fully benefit from the accessibility that we've provided, even though we think that we've done that in a standardized way. And sometimes that's what happens when we focus on only one technical presentation of accessibility. Is that often it's not great for everybody because we're designing it in a very limited way. And so we try to implement things like this. We hack and adapt to try to make things work to the end user's technology, to their skills, their desires. And then somebody shows up with one of these, excuse me, and they're different yet, and our accessibility suddenly isn't as good as we thought it was going to be. And so we hacked some more, and pretty soon our accessibility starts to look something like this universal type plug, and it has all of these switches and ports and levers and adjustments for different types of international plugs. I keep one of these in my international travel bag, and just you can kind of take this most everywhere and hopefully plug it in, and it's going to work. But it's big and clunky, and kind of what happens is we start to focus so much on accessibility that accessibility becomes the focus rather than the content and functionality that we're trying to make accessible. Sometimes these types of things are realized on our sites through things like text sizing widgets, because maybe our text is not sufficiently sized, so we create a text sizing widget that might provide benefit to a particular user with low vision that's not using the screen enlarger, but that comes at a cost to everybody else. Or accessible versions of our site. Oh, if you have a disability, here's your version. Something that we usually don't advocate. Style switchers or high contrast modes, and all of these hacks for accessibility. And it just starts to get a little bit clunky, and ultimately, even though we're trying to address accessibility for a broader range of users, it still doesn't work very well. Sometimes we end up with users that just try to kind of hack their way and struggle their way through accessibility. This is an interesting photo. It's of somebody that's used like a screwdriver and an awl that they've attached to their MacBook plug and then stabbed it into a European outlet so they could get power to their US adapter. And it's a little scary and dangerous and really rarely works very well. But this is the reality that our users sometimes are faced with when it comes to accessibility, struggling to make their technology and their preferences and their abilities and disabilities work with the things that we presented to them. And a lot of this happens because we're trying to build things in a fully standardized way. This is the way that we do accessibility. And this is not really the fault of accessibility guidelines. It's easy to say, oh, the guidelines are too complex, they're too restrictive, whatever it might be. Really, the problem with a lot of these types of accessibility implementations and struggles that we deal with is really that we're trying to apply technical guidelines and solutions to fix non-technical problems. We're viewing accessibility as a technical thing rather than as a human thing. Really, the problem is that we're dealing with usability pigs, right? We're dealing with usability issues and trying to fix those with technological solutions. So where do we go from here? What's our path? How do we start to maybe change how we view accessibility to try to address some of these complexities and difficulties? Well, a few things to consider. We always want to understand that compliance does not equal accessibility. In other words, you can have a website that is compliant to some set of accessibility guidelines, even a very strong, robust set of accessibility guidelines, like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, version 2.0. We can be very compliant with those guidelines, yet still be inaccessible to some users. So we want to make sure that we treat accessibility as being more important than compliance. If something is accessible but not compliant, does it really matter? Does it matter to the user? I would say no. They don't care about compliance. They care about their experience and that things are accessible to them. But if something is compliant but not accessible to the user, does it matter? Yes, at least to that user, it certainly matters to them. And sometimes we spend a lot of time, arguing over issues and complexities and nuances of compliance without really considering the end user accessibility. I know, when WebAIM launched our new website, we're WebAIM, web accessibility in mind, and so people really went through some of the design decisions and things that we built onto our site with a fine-grained comb to try to find places where we had messed up. And we got emails, in certain places saying, oh, this is strictly not compliant, or, oh, if you interpret the guidelines this way, then this is actually a compliance failure. And our response always was, well, does it impact users? And if so, how? And if it does, then yeah, we'll try to fix that. But if it's just simply a matter of compliance, it does not impact accessibility. Does it matter? No, not as far as users go. And that's what we're going to focus on. We want to ensure that we treat functional accessibility over technical accessibility. Most of this build does focus on technical accessibility. WebAIM does. You go to the WebAIM site, you go to our resources and articles, and most of those they're technical in nature. We're talking about code and technical implementations of accessibility, and that's not a bad thing because you have to have the technical accessibility in order to provide functional accessibility, but we want to focus on that functional accessibility. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are based on principles, but really, where the rubber meets the road when it comes to actually measuring compliance, there's hundreds and hundreds of pages of technical implementation and evaluation guidelines and techniques. So again, these things support accessibility, but they don't ensure accessibility. So we want to focus on true accessibility. But then you ask the question, well, what does that even mean? What does accessible mean? When somebody comes to us and says my website is accessible, that doesn't really mean anything. You have to quantify that. Accessible to whom? Accessible to what level? Accessibility really, we need to view accessibility as a continuum. If what that means is you can always be more accessible, that by definition means that you will always be inaccessible to somebody. You cannot adapt to the needs of every user. And it's important, I think, that we accept that. If your goal is 100% perfect, total, absolute accessibility, you really have failed before you've even begun, because it's not a possibility. So how do we start to view accessibility in a way that can be really meaningful? Because we want to be accessible. We want to ensure that our users, and the vast majority of users, as many users as is reasonable and feasible, are having a positive experience along that continuum. So we need measures along that continuum of accessibility. And that view of accessibility continuum is really what makes accessibility fun and fascinating and challenging to me, because there really are so many different ways to get to the same place. We're not constrained to a particular implementation or a particular, accessible websites don't all have to look the same, right? They don't have to function the same. There's so many ways to ensure a positive user experience, and I love that aspect of accessibility. While using these guidelines along that continuum as measures, so instead of someone saying, oh, my site's accessible, we can quantify that. My site's accessible to this level. With the understanding, as before, even though we might meet that level of compliance, that doesn't necessarily mean accessibility to everybody. Those guidelines are really invaluable, though, to make sure we're making progress and to see where we're at along that continuum of accessibility. So in some ways, if your site is accessible, if you were to define accessible as being accessible to everyone, in some ways you're maybe not doing enough. You're maybe not innovating. You're not updating enough. There's maybe more that you can be doing to really provide better stuff to your users. As kind of an example of this view of accessibility, consider on the screen, and I'll describe this if you can't see it, but there are on the screen it says color contrast checks should utilize some common sense. And each of those 8 words is in a different color. And there's kind of blue and brown and green and a couple gray ones and red and purple and orange words. I want you to consider for a second, in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there are contrast measures. There's a requirement for contrast. And some of these colors on the screen pass that WCAG 2.0 contrast requirement, and some do not. So I want you to just think for a minute which of these you think pass and which of these think you might fail. And while you're thinking, I'm going to snag a drink real quick. Okay, so I'm not sure if which ones you think pass or fail, but let me actually show you the answer, the results here. The top 4 all pass, the blue, brown, green, and the first gray words pass, and the bottom 4 fail, including the orange, purple, and red. I suspect that many of you, or most of you probably indicated that the red one probably passed, because it really, if you look at it, is kind of the most stark, most significant one color or word that's on the screen. Well, this is just the reality of the accessibility guidelines. They define a formula, and perhaps the formula is not perfect, but it defines a threshold, a line. It draws a line in the sand. And if you look at those 2 colors of gray, they look identical looking at them. Well, in reality, one has slightly higher contrast than the other, almost imperceptible, but one of them passes and one of them fails. So this is sometimes how we view accessibility when we focus just on compliance. Is, oh, this one passes, yay, you're accessible. Oh, this word fails, boo, you're inaccessible. In reality, do users work this way? Do humans work this way? Is it like somebody with low vision or color blindness would say, oh, that first word pass, oh yeah, I can read that perfectly. I can't even see the word that's below it. Of course not. But that's how we treat compliance. We draw a line and in the sand, and anything one side passes and anything on the other side fails. Really what we do is we treat accessibility like a toggle, right? And accessibility is not a toggle. Human accessibility doesn't work that way. It's not like, this is totally accessible and this is totally inaccessible. Again, it's a continuum. And when we view accessibility as a toggle, what we start to do is we start to view accessibility as something that if we do just enough, if we just cross the line, then we're done, right? And we pat ourselves on the back. This photo of these guys crossing the finish line of a race, I actually did a Google image search for marathon finish line, and I think this was the first picture that came up. And I don't know about you, but these folks, these models, definitely did not run a marathon. I mean, this girl hasn't even broken a sweat. If only accessibility were so easy. It really isn't that way. But sometimes we view it that way. Oh, I'm compliant. Yay, I'm done with accessibility. And when we view accessibility this way, is all we have to do is do just enough to cross this threshold, and then we're done. Going back to what we saw before, this is kind of the reality. We hack and we put things together just enough to cross that line, because we're viewing accessibility as a toggle, and this is not often very pretty. So a couple of what I call magic words is we deal with clients that are working on accessibility, many of them that are being subject to lawsuits or civil rights, Department of Justice complaints and structured negotiations. There are 2 words that I've really found that really powerful when you consider accessibility. And that's substantially compliant. What these words allow you to do is to really fight the right battles, to put efforts where you're going to get the best return, the best bang for your buck, without focusing on, that total perfect compliance. It allows you to focus on the real end user constraints, the real end user accessibility, and put your efforts where it's going to provide the most benefit for your users. We see a lot of people that their policy or guideline is strict accessibility to a particular level. Sometimes they spend a lot of time working on things to reach compliance that have absolutely no impact on end user accessibility, simply for the sake of compliance, and that's not a very good utilization, when maybe those efforts could be put somewhere else and provide better accessibility, maybe even things that go beyond compliance in a particular area to provide a better end user experience. So we can think about our 4 principles of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, P-O-U-R. We say we're going to build poor websites. Haha, if that helps you remember it, that's fine. So perceivable, operable, and understandable, and robust are those principles of WCAG 2.0. And these are great. These are amazing principles because they really focus on that end user accessibility, not strict compliance. We want things to be perceivable to our users. They can get into their senses. They can operate and navigate within them. It makes sense to them. It is understandable. And it is robust and works with the technologies that they're using. But I maybe propose that these principles alone are not really enough to provide a good, accessible user experience. I would suggest that first something needs to be useful, then usable, and then perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Who really cares if something is accessible, meaning perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, if it's not really useful or usable to them? If it's not meaningful content or a meaningful experience, who cares if it's accessible? Nobody's going to visit it. So it's accessible to whom? Well, nobody, because nobody's going to really bother to be part of that. So we want things to be useful and usable to the user. So going back to our usability pig, often what we have is we have things that are not useful, that are not usable. We have these usability pigs. And with that usability comes accessibility issues, and so we think that the solution is to put some technical accessibility lipstick on that pig, right? But and that's really what technical accessibility often is just lipstick on that pig. But it's still a pig, right? And it doesn't matter how much lipstick you put on that usability pig, it's still going to be a usability pig. And sometimes even worse is that this becomes our justification for maintaining a horrible user experience. We say, but it's compliant, but it's accessible, as if the accessibility somehow made it usable or useful to the user, because those accessibility guidelines don't really deal with usefulness or with usability that much. And sometimes we have things that are really usability pigs, and so we throw lots and lots of technical accessibility at it. As if some technical accessibility is good, then more is better. And ultimately, it's still a usability pig. The solution to a really complex form is not more accessible labeling or ARIA. If you're familiar with ARIA, I'm not going to get into it much. The solution really is a simpler form, not more technical accessibility. So no amount of accessibility can fix something that is not useful or usable. Doesn't matter how much accessibility we put at it. We recently were contracted to do some accessibility testing on a product, and when we got into it, we found it really was a usability pig. We did some real basic testing with some people in our building, just to see what their experience was using this. Not accessibility-wise, just we included some people with disabilities, but just what could they actually use this thing? And some of the comments we got were, and these are direct quotes, were, "I'd be happy if I never used that site again," we heard several times, what just happened? There was this level of confusion in the interaction, and predominantly the overall sentiment was, that's so frustrating. And that's what we heard over and over again. It was a site that was really based on the Windows 8 interaction model of panels and dragging, and our client really wanted to just simply make this thing compliant. And ultimately, it didn't matter if it was made compliant, and we did some things to implement compliance. We tried to help them fix the usability, but they were stuck into this model of this is the interaction and functionality that they wanted. And so ultimately, they ended up with something that was probably pretty compliant, but absolutely unusable. And it was kind of unfortunate, and so it didn't really matter that it was accessible because it was so unusable. Nobody would want to experience that. Consider something like this. This is another site that we've seen recently, this really complex interaction and presentation of course information. It has these spanned rows and levels and this complex interaction. It's kind of hard to, I can't even really describe it because it's hard to even understand what's going on here. But this complex table layout of course numbers and instructors and rooms and times and credits and seats available, and it's just kind of a nasty presentation. Now you could dive into this and you could start to define table headers, and you could associate data cells to headers, and you could implement technical accessibility. But functionally, for say a screen reader user to go in and experience and interact with this, is it going to be accessible? Technically, maybe. Functionally, no. It doesn't matter how much technical accessibility lipstick you throw on this pig, it will still always be a pig. So just to change gears just a little bit, this is a photo of an entrance to a courthouse. And if you look at this photo, I'll describe it. You may notice something about accessibility. The wheelchair ramp on this entrance comes in from the left-hand side of the photo and ends at the landing in the middle of the stairs. So there's stairs above and below it, and that's it. This is the accessible ramp for this entrance. So, I mean, did somebody consider accessibility when they built this entrance? Yes, they did, right? Somebody built a ramp. Somebody probably had a checklist that had wheelchair ramp on it, and they checked that box and said, yay, I built a wheelchair ramp, but they did not actually consider the full user experience. And sometimes that's what accessibility becomes. Let's check all the boxes on our checklist, and then we can say, yay, my website is what? Accessible? And not necessarily. We can really say, well, my site's compliant with a particular set of requirements or guidelines. So those checklists can be really helpful, especially to help us identify potential accessibility issues that may not be really apparent in other testing that we do, but we still need to ensure actual end-user accessibility. So going back to that wheelchair ramp, we want to focus on processes and flows. I would argue that having this wheelchair ramp is worse than no wheelchair ramp at all. Maybe the view's really nice up there from the landing, but if you were in a wheelchair and you went up that ramp just to discover that you actually couldn't get in the building, you've now wasted the user's time. And sometimes we see accessibility work that way. Sometimes our approach to accessibility is, let's start with the most popular pages on our site. And that can be great because that's going to have a significant impact. But we also need to consider user flows and processes. We evaluated a college application system. It's like you go and you fill out all of these forms. It was all online. You upload documents, fill out this information. And the process was pretty accessible most of the way through, but when you got to the very last step, the button that basically said, like, upload my stuff, finalize this, and I want to apply to this college, was inaccessible to keyboard users. And so really what they had is a ramp that went most of the way up the stairs, and then suddenly the accessibility wall came up. So we need to think about that entire process. Now that last button in that application process was not utilized all that much, right? Certainly compared to, say, their homepage or department pages, the number of visitors was very low. But pretty important for accessibility if they want to have students apply, absolutely. So consider those processes and flows for accessibility. So again, sometimes if we simply view accessibility to check these boxes to become compliant, and we think, well, the more boxes we check, then it must be more usable and useful and accessible, and often we're doing just adding more technical accessibility lipstick. So again, really, if it's accessible but nobody visits it, does it really matter? So let's focus on this philosophy: useful, usable, and then let's look at the accessibility. This can be a little bit difficult, right? Again, where do we go from here? How do we best ensure usefulness and usability? Accessibility is easier to evaluate because we have guidelines and checklists and we have really good tools. The usefulness and usability can be a little more difficult. We can't evaluate that simply with a checklist, simply through some automated tool. So as I've said several times, we want to focus on the user experience. What is that user experience? Not just on the design or specifications or requirements. While there are tools out there, especially for accessibility, use them as tools. Use them only as things to help us generate a better experience. We were recently contacted by somebody that says, oh, we want to use one of your tools because our approach to accessibility is we're going to use your tool to evaluate the top 3 levels of our pages. We're going to fix everything that is flagged as an error by your automated accessibility evaluation tool. And that was their entire approach to accessibility. And that was really setting themselves up for frustration and for an end user experience that was not going to probably be very good because the tools were so limiting in what they can actually detect when it comes to true accessibility. And even then, they can only evaluate technical accessibility. They cannot in any way really evaluate the end user functional experience with a site. So sometimes we see accessibility tools is the only thing in our toolbox is this great big sledgehammer of an accessibility evaluation tool. We've had clients that have dropped 6 figures on accessibility evaluation tools just to find out that, oh crap, we have millions of accessibility issues on our site, when those 6 figures could have fixed many or most of those actual accessibility issues. I've really found with accessibility, especially with modern accessibility and innovation, that I tend to use tools less and less because it's just difficult for tools to actually provide a lot of useful information about actual accessibility. That's not to say the tools are not valuable, but they should be just one tool in our toolbox. We also see an over-implementation of ARIA. ARIA is a new W3, well, I shouldn't say new, it's several years old now, but a relatively new accessibility implementation to address limitations of HTML for accessibility. But we're seeing a lot of people that view ARIA as their hammer in their toolbox, and if all you have is an ARIA hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. And we're seeing ARIA as an attempt to address significant accessibility issues, when really all it does is provides technical accessibility rather than addressing functional accessibility. So they want to ARIA all the things, and that seems to be a current mentality that we're seeing in a lot of websites, is more and more ARIA, more and more technical accessibility. And it's often, and most often, just technical accessibility lipstick on a usability pig. So we want to use our guidelines and checklists, but as before, use them as guidelines, use them as resources and measures along the continuum of accessibility. We've got to learn accessibility techniques. Again, techniques are necessary for accessibility. But often, if we really focus on usefulness and usability first, the technical accessibility becomes much, much easier. And I love this aspect of accessibility. It's kind of geeky, right? I love the challenge of tackling accessibility issues. And when we have clients that come to us and they say, we have some really distinct accessibility issues and concerns with this thing that we're building, when we look at it and it's actually usable, we can almost always find a way to make it accessible. Even if it's really, really innovative and maybe even different, if it's really usable and useful, accessibility is easy. If it doesn't have that usability built into it, accessibility is much more difficult and sometimes impossible. Now sometimes that requires some creativity. Most of the time anytime we change functionality and usability in something that we're trying to make accessible, usually it's doing it in a way that makes it more standardized. I'm going to skip a slide here. So we need to, I love this quote. It says, accessibility is a design constraint. Treat it like one. I don't mean that in a negative way, but in the sense that a constraint forces us to push boundaries and to think ahead. Do we really view accessibility that way as a design constraint? I don't know. I like this because it allows us to put accessibility into the same realm as usability and usefulness as something that we're really trying to build and innovate, and we don't simply address through technical compliance. Allows us, like it says, to push boundaries, to think ahead, to implement accessibility throughout the design and development process rather than after the fact. So we need to really step out of our user experience, step out of our own experience as we consider what the end user experience will be for people with disabilities. We need to consider those users, obviously. Often our user testing, I imagine most people listening today are pretty technical people. You understand the conventions of the web, and you know, I have a web browser open all day long. I know how to use it. I don't see those banner ads anymore. I know how to use search and navigation and all these other conventions and strategies to get through the web, and not everybody has those. Sometimes our user testing is, you know, you going to the office or cubicle next door and asking that person, you know, does this thing that I've built, does it make sense to you? And they say, oh yeah, it makes sense to me. Well, they are you, right? They probably have the same level of experience and understanding of the web as you do. And this is particularly difficult on the things that you're building and that you're using every single day. Right, which is if you're using it every day, if you built it, you're so intimately familiar with it that it's very difficult to actually see and understand what the experience might be for somebody else. So how do we do this? And if we want to get the perspective of users with disabilities, how do we best do that? Well, one thing I recommend is to not do accessibility testing with people with disabilities. I'm sure some of you are saying, wait a second, what? Don't do accessibility testing with people with disabilities? What do you mean? this sounds wrong. It sounds antithetical, and at first it does. Let me explain. Don't hang up yet. Okay, let me explain. What we suggest instead is do usability testing and include people with disabilities. If your focus is on accessibility testing, you will be able to identify accessibility issues. Well, first of all, don't do accessibility testing with people with disabilities until you get your act together, right? If you sit somebody down with a screen reader and they're telling you, oh, these images don't have alternative text, these form controls are not labeled, I mean, you just wasted that user's time, because you could hit a button on an automated tool and in a matter of seconds identify those types of things. So make sure you have at least some accessibility implementation first before you include people with disabilities in your testing. But if you focus just on accessibility testing, you're going to find accessibility issues, which is great. But with usability testing, you're focusing on a broader user experience. And along the way, you're going to find those accessibility issues, but you're going to ensure that the broader experience still is positive and it's efficient. So, you know, the end result is you're getting, for accessibility is the same, But with usability testing, you're getting so much more than just focusing on the accessibility issues through user testing. If you think this is overly difficult or expensive, hey, how do I do this type of testing? It really can be fairly simple. This book, Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug, is a great book that presents a pretty simple methodology for web usability and usability testing. So I'd highly recommend the book. In really short, it basically just talks about sitting users down and watching them, giving them some basic tasks, and seeing them walk through your site, and you can witnessing what they're experiencing and getting feedback along the way. So yeah, usability testing, but include people with disabilities so you can learn their distinct and unique maybe constraints or things that you may need to do to meet their needs. So we want to view accessibility of our site and usability really from 40,000 feet. Take a big step back, right, and overall look at your site, consider accessibility and usability, and if it's a usability PID, stop. Don't put a technical accessibility lipstick on it, fix it, right? First make it usable and useful first, or scrap it, right? And then let's look at the macro level. Let's actually get into the intimate details of our site, the forum interactions and the alternative text and things like that. As before, if it still looks like an accessibility, like a usability page, stop, right? The solution is not technical accessibility lipstick, it's to fix the actual usability issues. So really when you address it, usability first, I promise your accessibility work is most of the way done. There's still going to be some unique considerations for accessibility, but by presenting things in a more standardized way, in a way that truly is usable, accessibility becomes much, much easier to implement. I really like to, when I think about this usability and accessibility, statistically, the vast majority of us are going to experience disability at some point in our lives. We are, we're gonna fall and we're gonna break an arm. We're gonna have vision issues. We're gonna start to lose motor control. We'll lose cognitive function. We'll lose some hearing. We'll lose some vision. All of us, the vast majority of us, statistically, will experience disability at some point in our lives. And I love this vision of accessibility. I love being involved in this field because I know that I'm making the web better for myself in the future. We're really designing for our future selves, and I love that approach to accessibility, and that motivates me and hopefully might motivate you as well. So while there are a lot of usability pages out there, there's a lot of accessibility pages that are out there. Hopefully with some practical accessibility approaches, viewing accessibility the way that I've prescribed today, we can really turn these pages into beautiful, natively useful, usable, and accessible websites. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'll take some questions. I'm going to pull up, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and post those in text, or if you want to come with voice, and then I'll take just a minute in just a minute here, and I will show you some of the WebAIM resources. But you can go ahead with your questions if you'd like. I'm not seeing any come in. Let me just show a couple of WebAIM resources, and then we'll leave another minute or two for any questions that you might have. So the WebAIM website is webaim.org, webaim.org. It stands for Web Accessibility in Mind. Just a few things I want to highlight that we have available on our site. You can read about some of the accessibility services that we provide. We do provide accessibility training, evaluation, and reporting and technical assistance. If there's any interest there, we'd be happy to help you in your accessibility efforts. We have a huge amount of resources and articles on our site. If you want to know how to implement accessibility, how to evaluate accessibility, just the understanding of the end user experience for accessibility, you can read some of the many articles that are available on our site. Under resources, we have some tools that can be really helpful to you. A few resources that I would highlight. One is our Section 508 checklist. So it's a checklist that helps you evaluate and understand the Section 508 accessibility guidelines, which are quite old and dated, but are in the process of being updated. There's a WCAG 2.0 checklist. With the WCAG 2.0 checklist, really what we've done is we've taken the kind of difficult to understand, ethereal, fuzzy, kind of complex accessibility guidelines in WCAG 2.0, plus all of these hundreds of pages of supporting documents, and we packed it into 6 printed pages. We sometimes call it, WCAG 2.0 for mere mortals. It's just a simple way to evaluate and understand WCAG 2.0, really with a focus on web content. We have this color contrast checker for those of you that are doing contrast checking. As I mentioned in the presentation with WCAG 2.0, it has a formula and thresholds and contrast ratio. You can use this tool to put in foreground and background colors. It will tell you the WCAG contrast ratio and then whether it passes or fails WCAG 2.0 at certain thresholds. So this can be a very valuable and it's a popular tool for evaluating your color contrast, meaning the contrast between the foreground text and the background color. And then we have several community resources that might be of value to you. Marlene at the beginning talked about the discussion list. We have an active email discussion list. It's been around since 1999. There are thousands and thousands of posts in the archive. Chances are if you have an accessibility question, somebody's probably already asked it on the list, and you can search the online list archives and see if maybe it's been addressed before, or you can just go ahead and post, or just monitor the discussion list for new things that are maybe happening out there in the realm of accessibility. We have a monthly newsletter that we send out and a blog also if you'd like to follow some of those things. So okay, there was a question that came in. It says, how do you address the issue of getting buy-in from people who don't initially see why usability and accessibility is important? A great question. Often our approach to this is the stick, right? We want to we threaten with lawsuits, and we're going to be liable, and we're losing revenue, we're losing students, whatever it might be, and those things can be motivating. There's no doubt about it. But really, for us to get the best buy-in, the best motivation for accessibility, is you need to build empathy. Right? You need to really inspire people to see the vision of accessibility, to understand the end user perspective and how inaccessibility impacts actual people. And that's the best way that we've been able to find, that we found to get that buy-in. Sometimes simply allowing somebody to hear their website being read by a screen reader, it builds that empathy. It allows them to see the user experience and to see how accessibility can actually impact somebody with a disability. So I know that's not a single here's the answer, but that type of motivation works much better than beating them with a stick. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I will say thank you.
Jared, thank you so much. Really, really appreciated those perspectives. I gained some really good ways to approach our training and some points to share. I just find that really useful, and I see a lot of people are thanking you in the chat as well. But I really, really appreciate the perspectives you shared with us today, I think sometimes we get sidetracked in terms of how we approach accessibility. So this is a great reminder. And we will have the recording of your session up on our website next week, and I know you're going to share your slides with us too, so we really appreciate that. So with that being said, no other questions. I see Kelsey Camp and Curtis Biggs were with us in the Innovation Studio. Thanks for joining us both, and thanks for thanking Jared for his time today. Really appreciate that. The next meeting of the Montana Accessibility Interest Group will be March 6th. Hope you all can join us. And Jared, thank you again. It's just been awesome having you with us today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us.